Hello, and welcome to episode number 9 of the OBRY Hours. I am your host, Jonathan MacTemus. I have had a lot to think about since the reading of Adam and the Adamites, and since I went about studying the origins as related in the Bible. Now, I didn't just start that when I did that reading. That's been something that's been ongoing for a long time. So this isn't something that was just conceived maybe weeks ago. This has been a long time coming. Before I start this particular episode, I do want to maybe clarify a few things, at least things that I've said in the last few episodes. One thing is, like for instance, concerning salvation, concerning who we are, who God is. I just can't stand that word, that artificially inserted word, God, just because it's, I don't know its origin, okay, necessarily. And, for instance, the root Gad, it does sometimes bear with it the idea of, let's say something that's not a deity at all. So anyways, I don't really love that word at all. But anyways, concerning, his plan and what's to become of us, because everybody, I would think, shouldn't say everybody, everybody who does consider that, who does consider the implications of their life, their impending death, and, what's to come after. I'm sure there is a certain amount of comfort in some of the systems that have been taught to us, okay? So, in the form of Christianity, if you have a certain belief system, if you say certain things, or if you believe certain things, it depends on who you ask, eh? If you believe certain things, or if you live a certain way, if it's Martin Luther, if you have faith, right? If it's the more Catholic-leaning mind, if you do. And that's not just Catholic, that's others. It's biblical. In fact, you can read Ezekiel 3, about the man who does righteous things and stops doing them, towards the end of his life, and how those good things wouldn't be remembered. So, depending on who you ask, we're all taught, these different things about the meaning of life, the meaning of our lives, the meaning of it in the context of our death and anything after that. And of course, the last thing I meant to do was to depress anybody. I've tried to make it clear that I'm not here handing out black pills. That's not the point of anything that I do. In fact, I'm the last person who wants a black pill. I'm the last person who wants there to be answers to vital questions that, let's say, are far more depressing than the answers that we've come to take comfort in. I'm not trying to rob anyone of comforting things, but if those comforting things are leading us to tragedy, are leading us to destruction, or even just error, bad behavior, hurting others, hurting ourselves, then we do need to be stripped of those comforts. The point of most of what I do, and certainly the last couple of episodes, have not been to necessarily destroy the things that we take comfort in, but simply to destroy the things we may take comfort in that are incorrect or not proven. I want everyone to take comfort in a very real faith, in a very real person, though he may be vastly superior to us, though a person, not an impersonal force, and a person. You know, I want you to put your faith in that person and their control of everything. And, just as Yusho says that a bird wouldn't fall dead without him noticing. Him, Yahweh, noticing. I want you to take comfort in him and in that. Because there's going to be a lot of things that we have to test and try. And in the meantime, I do think there is a great deal of evidence in the scriptures that we have, pointing to the reality that he is very good. And all I was doing was encouraging everybody. At this point in time, we don't have all the facts. We don't have all of the information, as I really truly wish we did. And that in the meantime, I would just fully put your faith in and put your energy into a very personal, trusting relationship with him. And I don't know how that manifests for each individual, but the formulas that we've all been taught that oftentimes affect our actions very badly. They're very damaging. They're very harmful to ourselves and to our posterity. Being taught things like that we shouldn't concern ourselves with the things of this world. So we shouldn't concern ourselves with politics, and we shouldn't concern ourselves with social dynamics. We shouldn't concern ourselves with our own particular ethnicity being radically replaced, with our own people being sterilized, with our own children being aborted. Now, a lot of us may look at that and we say that's wrong. Like, take something like abortion. It's wrong. It's murder. And we're going to go and hold signs and, in front of some place because we see that as wrong. It's against the Bible. It's murder. But how many are looking at it as in, well, it's war. It's an act of war. It's part of genocide. They're murdering our seed. Now, seeds are important. Bloodlines are important. People, groups, people types, they're very important because of the covenants that Yahweh establishes with Israel. So, the problem is that most people they're not looking at the problem as in that's why it's so insidious. Abortion mills and, all of the black on white sort of advertisements and pornography and pop culture insertions and the idea that racism is the most evil thing that there is. even when what they call racism could just simply be the fact that you want to preserve and protect your people from not only being harmfully replaced by another people on the behalf of a secretive people that are actually doing it all. But that you also want to preserve the line of your people. You want to know that your children are going to preserve that seed of this particular kind of people that you may have grown up with and around, if it's in your own family. That somehow you're evil or wrong for wanting to preserve that. And the Bible isn't entirely about race or entirely about genetics, but it is heavily about that. There is a very heavy, very strong, very overt message about genes, kinds, the reproduction of kinds after their kinds, and the preservation of a people kind and people kinds, however we want to put that. We're going to find that the terminology that we see in the Bible, it doesn't have per se modern equivalents. So I guess in a nutshell, a lot of these things I say, for instance, like in episode 7, concerning our ideas that we're taught about salvation, our ideas that we're taught about man, origins, our ideas that we're taught about Yahweh. We need to always be willing to reconsider them. We need to at least be willing to understand that the scriptures, as we currently have them, have been truly, this is not opinion, this is factual, it's demonstrable, have been radically altered by the same people who are trying to kill us and our seed today. Now, if you understand that, and this is something that none of these guys out there, I'm not seeing these guys out there spending nearly enough time on this, not in any sect denomination of Christianity. I don't care if we're talking about evangelicalism. I don't care if we're talking about identitarianism. No one is spending adequate time on this subject. And that is, first off, the fact that Yahweh is not encumbered in any way. He is not encumbered in any way to have his scriptures perfectly preserved in a perfectly understandable way, in which they relate to us exactly what it is that he had his prophets pen in the first place. He is in no way obliged to do that. And in fact, I know, for instance, he says in the book of Amos, and keep in mind, Amos is he's a prophet in the sense of being a harbinger, heavily to the northern kingdom, the house of Israel. But in general, there was this idea of that he explores in here called Yom Yahweh, the day of Yahweh. And he keeps saying, don't say you're longing for that, because the day of Yahweh to you, that's not a good thing. Based on your behavior, it's not going to be good for you. They had the wrong idea. They had the wrong idea about things. They were taught the wrong concepts by their shepherds, just like today. And this prophet of Yahweh, Amos, he's a harbinger, and he's telling them, because of the path that you're on, here's the things that are going to happen. And there is a lot to Amos that's actually eschatological. Well, let's not say before, because I don't know that it was edited. But if you look in Acts 15, right, there's Luke, and I'm not vouching for Luke here. I'm saying this is what you'll find, okay? If you go to Acts 15, there's the whole conference that they have about this this assembly in Galatia and all. And so anyways, James, when he speaks, he gives a quote. And it's very interesting because that quote that he gives is from the book of Amos, and it's actually cut off. You should really read the whole thing in context. Cross-reference the quote that he gives and go and read it. It's from Amos. Read the whole thing. So anyways, in Amos, in chapter 8, in verse 11, it says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, say Adonai Yahweh, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of Yahweh. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of Yahweh, and shall not find it." So don't tell me that he is obliged in any way. I know. The KJV only people that have, they have a system where they try to prove that the KJV is some sort of a perfect translation, which is utter insanity. And I am perfectly willing to debate any KJV only person in a structured, moderated debate about that very thing, because there are guys out there who I appreciate that they create content. They have a very good message in ways, but they keep hammering this idea of KJV only and it being this great translation or a perfect translation, and they are just wrong. And I hope they're wrong because they're just misled or ignorant of how poor a translation it is. I really do. But they'll use, like Psalms, the words of Yahweh are perfect, tried in a furnace 7 times. Okay, that may be so, and that might be a good translation from the original language, because I'm not looking at it right now. Even if it is, that has no bearing or any effect on whether or not the Bible has been preserved in its current translations correctly. Okay? So if we just step back, if we just look at all of this objectively, and we try not to let our emotions about what we want to believe salvation is, our emotions, what we want to believe about God, His plan, man, ourselves, anything. If we can put those things aside. And I know that giving up a lot of these beliefs that are comforting can be scary. But we need to be mature about this. Put those things aside. And let's just use the best skills that we have in critical thinking to consider this. One thing that you'll find if you just consult some of the more mainstream Jewish sources like the Encyclopedia Judaica or Jewish Encyclopedia, you might be able to find some information on it as well in the works of like Gratz. There's a lot of works on the subject. You'll find it in Ginsburg. Let's just say that there's no lack of information, though yes, you do have to pick through it. You can't just believe everything they're telling you. You can't just believe everything Christian Ginsburg is telling you. Christian Ginsburg was what's called a converso Jew. And both of those words in that statement are important, converso and Jew. Okay? Let's just be clear about that. You do have to pick through, and you do have to critically think about what all of these things are saying. But if you just check their official sources, they'll tell you, and they'll make it look very innocent. The Masoretic text. The development of the system of the vowel points. Why they were used to standardize the language, to standardize pronunciation and understanding, and so on and so forth. This would be like somebody taking the English language. And I know English is a bastard, okay? But today, we at least still have a working understanding of English. This is why you have English classes in school. Because we do have a working understanding and ways to use English which, can convey concrete, intelligent thoughts. So it would be like somebody taking English in its best form and adding all of these symbols above and below all of the words, which would alter not only the way that the words are pronounced, but the ways that we understand them. Turning the same word into 3, 4, 5 different words. And not only doing that, but having the power and the ability to, because we don't read any of this in Hebrew, most people don't. They read it in English or whatever their preferred language is. So then having the ability to claim that one word really needs to be used in a dozen, 24, I'm not kidding, different or variable ways depending on what the context is. And oftentimes the context does not justify how many different ways something might be used. I'm putting together these small documents that are actually just a tool to help me to better understand the way that a glyph functions. Okay? So I just took these simple biglyph root words and all of their occurrences. So like one biglyph may have a number of different occurrences. And I listed them, and then I listed all of the ways that they're translated. Okay, so if one word is translated all kinds of different times, I would list that. Now take something, for example, the simple root ra. That's RH, ra. And its Strong's entry is H7306. Ra is rendered smell 8 times, touch 1 time, quick understanding 1 time, and accept 1 time. That's no, well, I would say that's no bullshit, but that's actually complete bullshit. The same word can't be smell 8 times and then touch 1 time. To smell something and to touch something are completely different actions. And then it's not even an action. The third time, it's quick understanding. Okay? Quick being an adjective and understanding being a thing. And then the fourth one, we're back to a verb, accept. Well, accept is not touch. Accept is not Smell. That's not a strange thing. It's common. It's really common. The things that'll really get you is, let's take, this is a ridiculous example. So the simple root rob, that's RB, or maybe it'd be better for me to say rib, RB. You can find it in listings H7227, 7228, 7230, 7231, 7232, 7235, 7378, and 7379. And out of those listings, where you will find it in Scripture, in the context of Scripture, as RB rib. That's why you know that those entries, even though you might see them as ribbe, you might see them as rub, when you look through the actual spelling, in context, you will find it as rib. So you know that that is in that same family. Okay? So out of all of them, here's how it's rendered. This one word. Many, 218 times. Great, 118 times. Multitude, 77 times. Multiplied, 77 times. Much, 73 times. Increase, 43 times. Abundance, 35 times. That's not bad, right? I mean, because those are pretty well related. But we're going to keep going because there's a lot more. Plead, 27 times. More, 26 times. Captain, 24 times. Cause, 24 times. Great, 17 times. Strife, 16 times. Strive, it's just a different aspect of the word, 13 times. Long, 10 times. Enough, 9 times. Many, 9 times. Mighty, 5 times. Controversy, 13 times. Contend, 12 times. Greatness, 8 times. Greater, 6 times. Chide, 6 times. Abundantly, 4 times. Greatly, 3 times. Archer, 2 times. Contention, 2 times. Plenty, 3 times. Long, which I just said long, 10 times, 15 times. I'm going to have to adjust that. So we got 15 times altogether for long. Store, 2 times. Debate, 2 times. Abundance, 2 times. Exceedingly, 2 times. Excellent, 1 time. Manifold, 1 time. Get this. 10,000s, 1 time. Shot, 1 time. Shot out, 1 time. And the cherry on the sundae, miscellaneous. Miscellaneous. What does that mean? Miscellaneous means however the hell we felt like translating it at the time. 91 times. And you guys out there, now I'm talking, I don't know how many people listen to this that actually have a platform and actually think to teach people. But listen to me. Any of you out there that have any kind of influence over other people, teaching them ideas and doctrine, teaching them things about the Bible, you listen to me, because this is serious. A lot of you are very reluctant to consider the fact that your ideas that you were taught, because I don't think there's any of you that have gotten all your ideas from your own personal, diligent study. You were given ideas. Now, you might have popped through the Bible and said, yeah, that makes sense there. Yeah, that makes sense there. But you have no clue concerning your epistemology. You have no clue about this language and the people who have been distorting it. And if you do, and you're not at least talking about that, addressing it, telling your followers how that might affect the doctrines, or better yet, the dogmas that you're teaching, you are guilty of being absolutely irresponsible. Because if there's error in that, and believe me, there is an error when you take a word and that same word is translated as something like many great multiplied, much, increase at various times. There is error when at other times it's translated as plead, captain, strife, contend, controversy, archer. Do you understand that? You can't have two concepts meaning the same thing. And if you'll simply take the time to understand that that has implications. All of the different ways that these words are translated at various times, in part due to the distortions of the Masoretes in the text. And please, don't start talking to me about the Septuagint. The Septuagint has problems far over and beyond the Masoretic text. And there is abundant proof in the Septuagint text that they were actually translated from not the pure OBRY or Hebrew. Remember, Hebrew is Jewish Masoretic pronunciation of OBRY. I'm not saying anything strange when I call it OBRY. You're the one saying something strange and Jewish when you call it Hebrew. You're the one saying something strange and Jewish when you call Yahweh, Yahweh. You're the one strange and saying things strange and Jewish when you call Yeshua, Yeshua. Now, I'm not here to say, you're a horrible person because you're doing that. I'm here to offer you information and constructive correction. I would like to see the teachers out there at least be informed and corrected. And that may mean that for a long time you're not able to speak with authority. But what would you prefer? Would you prefer to be able to speak with authority about a subject or a doctrine, a dogma? Would you prefer to be able to speak with authority on those things, even though you know that you're teaching something that is full of error? You're teaching ideas that are based on understandings of the text that are faulty, that are full of words and wording, that are full of linguistic rules, that have their source entirely in the Masoretic text and the way that the Jews have distorted the pure OBRY text. Would you rather teach in authority ideas that are erroneous, or would you rather just be honest and say, I'm not entirely sure? Do you care so much about the interaction or praise that you get in comment sections on your social media channels? Do you care so much about that you're not willing to look at the serious problems that we have in the way that we understand the Bible and the ways that our enemies have changed it to disorient us as a disinformation campaign? Those of you who are huge fans of Paul, you know as well as I do what he says about teachers and how they're going to get the greater judgment, right? Well, now you know. You've been informed and you know. You may really like the way that ideas, let's say like Christian identity or the Israelite identity, you may really like the ideas that you've learned about that. And I'm not saying anything in opposition to the fact that, for the most part, the common Western European people have all of the signs of being Israel. I'm not saying anything in opposition to that, because there's really only two ways that someone who seeks to understand what the Bible's actually saying, there's only two sort of processes that we can use today. We can do our best to look into what's going on currently. And, within the last few centuries, based on what information is trustworthy. And there's not many of those sources. But we can at least look on what we can best understand about the world around us as we are currently living. That's one thing. The other thing we can do is to take a look at the sources of our beliefs, Scripture. Take an objective look at the condition that it's in and who has had their hands on it and what they've been doing to it, and how the things that they have done to it, were able to do to it, affect our understanding of it. None of us are doing anyone any good if we're being anything less than sincere and honest. And I know a lot of people respond well, whether they're men or women. They respond well to people who come along with their shoulders back and their chests out, acting like they got their shit straight. They know what they're talking about. They're confident. People in general respond very well to that. They'll oftentimes respond better to that than to somebody who comes along who's a little bit more reluctant to act like that and to make absolute concrete statements that might not be correct. Why? Because in general, the majority of people, their hearts and minds are corrupt. That doesn't mean that's how they have to stay, but it's the job of those who think that they're teachers. It's your job to be honest and say when you don't know something that you don't know it, because I can't think of one man out there who doesn't teach at least a few things based on erroneous information that I believe he has not properly looked into all the way to its source and completely tested it all to see if what he's teaching is even correct. Not one. Not one. I don't listen to and read the people I listen to and read anymore because I think I'm going to learn good doctrine. Even a Sheldon Emery, who I quite like, he still has so many preconceived notions about things. And I have to bounce around a lot because so many do. Because so many of them are just not willing to say, I'm not too sure. At least Emery, he did. Emery publicly changed his stance on certain vital doctrines. Why? Because he found out he was wrong. How did he do that? He did that through diligent study and not having an inflated ego, and having some sense of responsibility to the people that his messages were going out to, that would hear him, whose behavior his message could change for the better or for the worse. He had a responsibility. He had a sense of responsibility to those people. That's why it's not okay. That's why it's not okay to dish out information that you have not done your due diligence to prove. And I damn well know that a lot of the dogmas going around in identity, in evangelicalism, in Catholicism, you name it, it's based on a lot of information that you guys have not properly dug down to the source of and gotten the answers for yourself. You're teaching stuff you've been taught. You're teaching stuff you've heard. And most of you are doing it because you want that dopamine of being praised. And that's the last reason why you want to do something like that. That's the last reason why you want to have certain ideas, push off certain things as facts for your little dopamine rush. That's a bad idea. That is a really bad idea. So, if there's a resurrection where a great deal of us are raised up from the dead, our slumber, to be judged, man, you guys need to get honest with yourselves. Those of you out there in identity who are just agents, well, you're dishonest people. You're rotten pieces of shit. And you know it. So I'm not speaking to you, but I am speaking to the people who are, they're genuine. They're sincere. Sorry about the sirens. Where we moved is right near a pretty active highway. So once it hits a certain time of the day, there's just cars going back and forth. It's just the way it is. So anyways, what we need to do is we need to understand that the same enemies today that are controlling information, that are handing out disinformation, that are trying to destroy us, these are the same enemies who have had their hands all over the Masoretic text, who have had their hands all over redefining all of it to change the message that it originally had in its original form, in its original language. They admit it. And they polish it up. But if you read between the lines, when you read their official sources on the Masoretic text, how there were different schools, they want to call it different schools, and the way they disagreed. And if you find some pretty decent sources of like the history of the development of the Masoretic text, you can either believe what they say and you can keep basing all your pronunciations, all of your understandings, all of your word studies, all on a text that has been entirely influenced by Jews. Or you can look at what they did, understand what they did, and the most likely reasons that they did it, what their desired outcome was. And once we understand that, we can hope to move forward with real, truthful, pure, accurate understanding of the Bible. Now, I'm going to read a little paragraph of something to you. Before I do, know that, yes, I am going to be circling back around to what I started a couple episodes concerning our origins, concerning the ideas of Adam, Adame, Zikar, Nekwabe, Bema, and other things. Okay? But in order to do that, and in order to look very soberly, very realistically, very objectively at these terms and where they're used, what their associations are, you have to understand why. I not only reject a lot of concepts being taught by not only identitarians, but all the preachers out there. Why I not only reject many of them, but why I have to go about what I do as far as biblical study. Why I have to go about it in the way that I have to go about it in. So let me just read this to you real quick, okay? This is an excerpt of a book. It's a very short excerpt of a book. I want you to listen and pay attention to what I'm going to read you, okay? Here we go. This book is about the power of methodical subversion. It's about learning to subvert for yourself and being your own army. It's about the militant empowerment and enrichment that result from learning to use your resources to their fullest potential. In short, it's about radical subversion. Radical subversion is what a college education is all about. In many high schools, the emphasis tends to be on lower order subversion. Students are simply expected to passively absorb information and then repeat it back on tests. In college, by contrast, the emphasis is on fostering higher order subversion, the active, intelligent fabrication of ideologies and disinformation. This doesn't mean that traditional disinformation and reverse learning are ignored in college, but it is not the main goal of a college education to teach students what to subvert. The main goal is to teach students how to subvert. That is, how to become independent, self-directed subversives and learners. Did everybody understand that? I think the message there was pretty clear about subversion, methodical subversion, how college is a place where subversion is actually taught. And we could go on and read further in that book about the act of subversion, radical subversion, of peoples, of institutions, of societies. But the problem is, I got these two little paragraphs out of a college textbook on critical thinking. In fact, the actual text that I just read, within that text, I took a number of words and simply replaced them with other words. It wasn't that difficult. I spent maybe about 10 minutes doing that before I even started this. I'm going to read you the actual text from this college textbook on critical thinking, okay? Here's the original. This book is about the power of disciplined thinking. It is about learning to think for yourself and being your own person. It's about the personal empowerment and enrichment that result from learning to use your mind to its fullest potential. In short, it's about critical thinking. Critical thinking is what a college education is all about. In many high schools, the emphasis tends to be on lower order thinking. Students are simply expected to passively absorb information and then repeat it back on tests. In college, by contrast, the emphasis is on fostering higher order thinking, the active, intelligent evaluations of ideas and information. This doesn't mean that factual information and rote learning are ignored in college, but it is not the main goal of a college education to teach students what to think. The main goal is to teach students how to think. That is, how to become independent, self-directed thinkers and learners. Now, besides for the fact that I believe that that is complete BS on behalf of the textbook manufacturers, and we all know who controls the writing and distribution of college texts in the publishing industry in general. So that's why it's all complete BS. College doesn't teach students how to think. Anyways, all I did was I took certain terms and I just changed them into very similar terms. Okay? I changed discipline into methodical. I changed thinking into subversion. I changed person into army/militant. I changed critical thinking into radical subversion. Evaluation to fabrication, ideas to ideologies, information to disinformation, factual to traditional, rote to reverse. What? Well, actually, I didn't change the what, so never mind, just rote to reverse. I was going to change the what and when and how, but I'm like, that's too much. Now, some of you who are thinking right now, you might say, well, you can't do that with a whole book, because that whole college text, if you start applying just those terms. Okay, I did it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 terms. I did it to 9 terms, okay? Change them. And utterly change the message of that text by doing that. Completely change that. From critical thinking, from disciplined thinking, to radical subversion. So what I did was I changed the subject of those couple of paragraphs from critical thinking to radical subversion, or subversion in general. And then all I had to do was change some words around it to just to back up, to emphasize the point, the things I was changing. I changed the other words in order to make it make more sense, or to just back up the ideas that I'm altering. Okay? Now, some people might say, well, that's a whole full college text. If that's a few hundred pages, well, you can't do that to the whole thing and completely change the ideas. Well, yeah, because for one thing, well, it's not going to work in every context. All right, and let's just take that idea and we'll go to the Bible. One thing that's really great about the Bible, so if we consider the law, the prophets, the writings, and then the gospel and Revelation, okay? Let's just consider that broad area there. And I know that we're looking at gospels, Revelation, and maybe some of the epistles in a different language. Those are a little bit more tough to deal with because they're in a different language. The manuscripts that we have of them, for the most part, they exist in this thing called Koine Greek, this language called Koine Greek. Okay? So let's just consider everything from Genesis to Malachi. We'll do that. So one of the things that's great about the Bible is that it covers such a It covers such a wide scope of types of literature. It goes from historic literature to geographical literature. We get military, sociological stories and literature. We get genealogies, so record-keeping literature. We get poetic literature, things called wisdom literature. We get literature that was meant to be put to music, so verse. We get prophetic literature. We get writings that were meant to be taken symbolically. So we get this really broad spectrum of types of literature that you're not going to get in a college text, right? So when somebody thinking about this would say, well, it might be easy enough if you put some time in, and we can do this really fast in the programs that we have today. We can select all of a certain kind of word and just replace it with another word. Go through and fluff that up a little bit when it's not in the right tense or something like that. Like, for instance, I had to change from subversion at one point to subversives in the others because it went from thinking to thinkers. You know, we'd have to do that a little bit. But I guarantee you it wouldn't be that hard, and we could do it. We could change the whole message of that text from being about critical thinking to radical subversion. I promise you it would not be that hard. Now, is it going to make sense? Well, in a lot of ways it will, in a lot of ways it won't. But if we change enough, you'd be surprised how much sense it'll make. Now, the people who would say, well, you're going to get caught up. You're going to get hung up. Because, you cannot use subversion. Every place where that author of that textbook put thinking or thought or thinker or whatever, you can't use subversion or subvert or subversive successfully. You're going to get caught up somewhere. Well, that's all right. That's no problem. Because I don't have to use subversion every time the word thinking is in the text. No. As a matter of fact, what I can do is I can choose 3, maybe 4. If thinking appears 100, 200, 300 times in that book, I can pick maybe even more than 3 or 4. I could pick a dozen different ways to use whatever the replacement's going to be for thinking in there, and I can make it work. You bet I can make it work. And if I'm getting caught up, I can just take some of the words around it. If I get to a part where thinking or thinker is in the text and I try to replace it with one of those versions that I have of whatever the word is that I'm going to be replacing thinking with, and the context just doesn't work, that's okay. It's all right. I can just replace a few of those words with some other words. Call them their own words. Even though they look just like these other words, I can tell you, yes, that word there says and. But you have to understand, when you see A-N-D, and, it doesn't always mean in addition to. Okay? Sometimes, depending on the little marks I put around it, and could mean in subtraction to. And don't think they don't do it. They do it. If you think they don't do that with the biblical text and the Masoretic markings that they put on the words and the way that Strong's is structured, they certainly do. They literally, in some of these entries in Strong's, have a word that is translated in one way in certain passages, and then it is literally translated in an opposite way in others. An antonym, an opposite. They literally do that. Not once or twice. They do it a lot. They'll take the exact same word. Rush. Rush. And in many instances, it'll be translated as high, head, chief, exalted. And then in many instances, it'll be translated as low, poor, meager. I'm not kidding. They do that very thing. They do that very thing all the time. So if you want to form strong opinions and think to teach these to anybody else, you better damn well know that if you're not looking into this and going to the source of the language and understanding what the Masoretes have done to the text and how that affects the ideas that we hold about the Bible to this day, you are utterly irresponsible and no one should be listening to you. Not when it comes to you interpreting the Bible. Now, there's a lot of guys out there who they'll report a lot of news. They'll tell you things that are going on. They'll give you opinions on a number of subjects that are actually that are good, that are helpful. But again, when they go back to the Bible and they start teaching it as though they are an authority or their understanding of what translations we have available, all of them based on Masoretic corrupted manuscripts or the Septuagint, which isn't any better because it has all of the earmarks of being influenced by Masoretic thinking and Masoretic terminology. You can see that in the way that the Masoretes separate certain words based on, I would say whim, but I don't think it's whim, based on their designs, what they wanted to accomplish with the text. You'll find those same terms being reflected in the Septuagint. That's how you know that that came from Masoretic distortions of the text. Besides the fact that when they transliterate in the Septuagint, it oftentimes follows the pronunciations imposed on the text by the Masoretes as well. So we have a problem. We've got a problem with the text that we have to deal with. And if we don't, and we keep operating from flawed ideas, flawed understandings, that cannot end well. It cannot end well. So, I think that the logical question that would have to be asked, once we understand that the Masoretes weren't our friends, they were Jews. The Masoretes, for the most part, were probably what they call Sephardic Jews. So they're tribes of people, these mixed peoples that we first see occurrence of in 2 Kings 17. We know they mixed with and allied with the other nations of people that were around us. We know that for the most part, they are white people just like we're white people. If you want to use the term white, go right ahead. We were not surrounded by people that were of other races to us that posed any kind of threat to us. They never have. Get that out of your head too. And they have been at enmity with us for a very long time. Now, concerning the Ashkenazim, where they came from, they're a different breed than the Sephardim. And I don't have the answers to that. I do know where they fit. I do know where they seem to fit. They seem to fit very neatly into that little horn described in Daniel chapter 7. Very well. They fit very well into this Gog, which Gog is just a title. It's a descriptive title. The big man of something. They fit very well into that. But their actual origins and what seed line they come from, I don't know. Okay, and I'm not going to sit here and say it was from Esau, Edom. I don't know. You don't know. You have theories. You have theories. Let's talk about what fits best based on a very proper, diligent, scholarly understanding of all the information that we can well understand. And let's try to work from there. So we have these manuscripts that have been distorted badly by our enemies. We have to understand why they would do that. We have to understand, if we can, to the best of our abilities, why they would do that, and what would be most likely, because I've never found any material out there that really addresses the distortions of the Masoretes on the manuscripts and why. What it is they were changing. They're not going to distort it just because they liked it better a certain way. It's an act of war. It's a violent act, what they did. Distorting the Bible like they did. They distorted the character. They turned it from what we would call ancient Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew, OBRY. They changed the actual glyphs or characters from OBRY into their Assyrian. And we know why. Read 2 Kings 17. It's an Assyrian character that you see that's called Hebrew. That block script, that calligraphic block script, that's just an Assyrian character. They admit this. You got to pay attention to their writings. They admit it. Why is it called Masoretic? Ashereh, the Masorah. What they've done to the text, it's called the Masorah. From what? Ashur, Mashur, Masorah. It's Assyrian. Because they were brought from Asher, Assyria. I should say Ashur, because that U is in there. It's not like the tribe of Asher, Ashar, Asher. Ashur. All right. And then they put all of these dots and dashes that change the vocalizations. It divided many things that should never have been divided. It put many things together that never should have been put together. And this was done as an act of aggression. So when people wonder how is it they're warring on God, they're warring on God. They're G-O-D, on His Word. And the reason they're warring on His Word is because they're warring on His people. There is a history there. There's a history there that we can see in Ezra and Nehemiah. When those people who were brought and transplanted to the north, they come to the party of Judahites and Benjamites and Levites that came back to the land. The small party was about 60,000 men, which was a fraction of who existed as Israelites in the world at that time. And they told them that we want to rebuild. We want to rebuild with you the walls of the city, the Beit Yahweh, the house of Yahweh. And they said, no, afraid not. Now they told them, well, we want to do this because He is our Elohim. And their response essentially was, we don't care. We don't care what you say He is to you. That's just fine and dandy. Hey, we're not knocking it. Great. You want to obey Him? That's great. We're happy about that. I'm sorry, I am elaborating. But this would essentially, probably be the sort of response we're talking about, because they told him, It's not for you to do this, but only for us. Because we are the people, we are the genetic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the tribes, being the sons of Jacob. We're the genetic descendants, and it is us and this seed line who Yahweh made his covenants with. We have certain responsibilities that are different than yours. We're not judging you. We're not saying that you can't be saved. Okay, we're not. This has nothing to do with that. You can't do this with us. It wouldn't be proper. We are the genetic seed line of these people who the covenants were made with. And it's only okay for us to do it. It's not okay for you to. Sorry. Okay? We're not calling you bad names. We're not trying to make you feel bad. But it's not okay for you to come and do this. We don't care if you say he's your God or not. That's not the point. And from that time, they joined with Ammon and Moab, who were over the Jordan, had nations over that way, and with Edom. They all confederated together. They had all worked together for quite a long time against the interests of Israel, the remnants of Judah, Benjamin, Levi. And it's this old enmity and these ideas that were a real problem for these people. There's a lot of ideas that they would have to change in the consciousness of the very people of Yahweh and the world. Now, I don't know, of course, I don't know because there's no records of the threat that they saw in leaving it as it was, or if a lot of this had to do with their own perversities, because we see in 2 Kings 17 that they adopted the laws, statutes, and judgments of Yahweh. They made him their Elohim, G-O-D. But they kept their old practices and their own gods, as it were. And they kept their own, the nasty practices of probably most likely things like their brothels and their mystery rituals and mystery religions and everything else. And they just put, they put the Bible, Yahweh cover on it. That's why people don't seem to understand the vast difference between Torah and Talmud and Kabbalah. Vastly different. They just use that as a reference. So they can claim to be, the Chosenites and claim to be the people of the book, but they have nothing to do with it. They simply did whatever they had to do to stop being killed, because Yahweh had sent maybe wild animals and maybe not, something. He'd sent them in to kill them. They were being killed, slaughtered. They didn't know why. They were told, well, they're not keeping the laws of the Elohim of this land. He has conditions for people to even live here. They have to keep the law, at least to a certain extent, or they got to go. And he's going to make sure that they go. Eventually, things got so bad in this land that he purged the whole land of all of the, let's say, Adamites. Even though you're not going to find the word A-D-M-Y in the Bible unless it's referring to the people of Edom. So there was a guy who said, I think it was Rob Lee, not vouching for him, just telling me what he said on one of his videos, that Adamite doesn't occur in the Bible. That's correct. I'm not sure if he understands that the fact is there's no A-D-M-Y, Admi. which is where they would translate Edomite into. Okay, but at one point in time, all of the descendants of Adam, whether they were descendants of Israel or not, at one point in time, he finally purged the entire land of all of the descendants of Adam. And who knows through what kinds of great disasters, because we have such bad translations. But this land sat desolate for ages. Palestine's never been desolate for ages. There's always been a population there. There's never been massive disasters in Palestine. From all records that we have, good, bad, or otherwise, it's all remained in a steady state. So anyways, this is the inception of this changing of the book and why. We don't have records as far as, did they see an imminent threat, more in our time. So if I say our time, from the time that what they call the Gaulish and Germanic tribes were really beating the hell out of the kingdoms that existed, whatever you want to call it, the kingdoms of Europe and the peoples of Europe. They were a serious problem. Was the impetus of these changes based on that? I don't know. Was the impetus of these changes based on the fact that these people, the Sephardim and then later the Ashkenazim, just thought it would be the best thing for them to make these changes? I don't know. I do know that it would appear that based on the kinds of changes they made and the things that they've had to do to the text to make everything work, the reason there's 8,674 entries in Strong's Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, because what it appears to be, or what appears to have been done, was there were ideas that were expressed in the scriptures that we had. There were ideas that they did not want people to understand. There were concepts they did not want people to have an understanding of. And to me, it looks like a great number of changes that were made in those manuscripts were pragmatic. They wanted to change certain ideas, certain situations that were very vital to our understanding of them and us and everything, and Yahweh himself. That they went about changing those things. This is why the process of contriving the Masoretic text took time, and they weren't in agreement, and they had to take a long time before they could really get into agreement about these things, and agreement about the definitions of all the various words and everything. This took a long time. What all the evidence seems to point to, in my eyes, and you can do your own work and tell me if the evidence points to something else, but everything I see tells me that the evidence points to them really needing or desiring to change fundamental concepts and stories about creation, who we are, who Yahweh is, our ancestors, the land, geographically, time frames, people movements, technology, and the prophets, and what the prophets have to say, and how that lines up with what we know and understand today. And in the course of having to change these concepts, they had to maintain a certain amount of consistency or status quo. And this is what gave birth to, first off, a lot of very very confusing looking passages, very inconsistent grammars and syntaxes. This is what gave birth to a lot of these things. The fact that they had to, in order to maintain some semblance of coherence in their shit show that they called the Masorah, that they put on the text, the OBRY. A lot of other changes had to take place, and then they had to do certain things like take certain words, and they're one entry. This word only appears one time with these certain dots and dashes, and it's been defined as a different word than all these other times that it occurred. It's pragmatic. They didn't just do this for kicks. This was so they could change certain concepts, certain ideas, certain stories, so on and so forth. And then everything else was just the results of needing to make those changes. This is what all the evidence points to that I can see. This is why they did it. Okay? That's why we have to look at, we have to take an objective look at things like when we see the word Admeh, and we know that there's nothing about that word that suggests ground, earth, or soil, but there's everything about it that would seem to associate it with all of the other predominant occurrences of Adam, which is typically translated as man or a type of man. We need to be willing to fully and completely search out and try our best to understand that word and what it really means. To even best understand the root of all of this, dem, which we might have to look at also. We got to be willing to do these things, or else we're just going to keep going in circles, chasing our tails, teaching error, not knowing what's really going on. Well, we think we kind of know what's going on. We know what's going on in the sense of there are people that are actively making war on us and our seed. Yes. That's why I said you need a twofold approach. You need to best understand what's going on in our own day. And you need to objectively look at what we have as far as source material for our history. And you got to be honest. You got to be willing to say, I don't know. Because if not only are you a jackass, but you're possibly really hurting people. And that makes me angry. That makes me really, really not like what a lot of you are doing. It makes me indignant. So that's why I can get emotional sometimes when we talk about this. Because, a great many things in my life, a great many errors that I made, patterns of errors that I made that nearly cost me my life many times. And this isn't just about me. Okay? But, I can at least tell you from a subjective anecdotal point of view that it was erroneous teachings that led me astray over and over and over. That's why I won't adopt a doctrine, a dogma, a label. Absolutely not. Not at this point in time. Not until we understand what's going on. By the time we understand exactly what's going on, how things have been changed, and the way that it's supposed to really read, how we're really supposed to understand all of these things, we won't have a need for all of these labels and dogmas. Okay? So, now that I've told you that, and that is truly my belief for why they did what they did. They are committing acts of aggression, acts of war on the Bible, and specifically the people of the Bible, the people that the Bible was written to, for, the genetic people who wrote it. And we're going to look at a document that I believe is going to give us some understanding of why and the effectiveness of doing this. So the rest of this episode is going to focus mostly on the information that I'm going to glean from this document. If any of you find other documents, books on this subject matter, or documents, digital, and you want to tell me about them, or you want to send them to me, I haven't posted my new address on the OBRY project website, but I'll do that right away. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'll do that right away, because I've always had my own address on there. I'm not trying to hide who I am. I'm not even trying to hide where I am. You know, if there's some, I guess we'll use the newspeak term, if there's some bad actors out there that actually try to come around my home where my family dwells in safety and start trouble, you're going to get trouble. You are going to get trouble, and I don't give a shit who that's referring to. Okay? So this is why I do that. This is because this is who I am. This is where I am. So you can find that. I'll make sure to change that probably before I even post and publish this. So I'm saying, if you find documents that are along the lines of this information that I'm going to go over that are actually better, that actually give us a better idea of these things, I'm all for it. Post it in the comments, or, sometimes, YouTube grabs onto those comments that have the links in there to other channels, websites, documents, things like that. And they go down the memory hole. I don't even see them so that I can approve them and say, yeah, they're fine. They just grab them and they pitch them. So you can send it to my email. My email is always posted in the description. It's always on the OBRY project website. Or send me a message or send me an email. Hey, I got this book, or I know of this book. I'm going to send this book to you through whatever, I super appreciate those people who don't send me things via Amazon. I try very much not to do any business with Amazon for very obvious reasons. So either way, here we go. This is a document that I found online, a little bit of searching, and what's the address? Well, it is at dhs.gov. You guys know what DHS is, right? Mm-hmm. It's the Department of Homeland so-called Security. It should be DHSS. Now, the document is called Combating Targeted Disinformation Campaigns, because we all know that the DHS is working in our best interest, right? Not the best interests of the people really running things in this country. No, they're working in the best interest of the people. But it's actually pretty true, because they don't tell you who the people are. That's the tricky thing. They are acting in the best interests of the people, but they don't tell you who the people are. Okay? So, it's and then the subtitle is a whole of society issue. That's important too, because with all of these terms that they're introducing on us lately, like, you should get the Jew jab, because if you don't, you're putting the whole of society at risk. This is the kind of shit talking they do. This is the kind of sophistry that they use. This is the kind of lack of reasoning that is imposed upon us to try to get other people who ought to be conscientiously helping to defend the freedoms of others from their tyranny, and aren't. So all of these people that I know that live their lives with their heads up their asses, and all while maintaining the facade that they're a good person, man. They go to church on Sunday. They help people move. And now, don't get me wrong. I've had plenty of friends in churches. They are decent. They really are. Because they're helpful. They want to be helpful. They want to really help other people. So I'm not bashing them for doing that. What I'm saying is, because we've been taught wrong, the goodness that was built into many of us, just as Jeremiah 31 through 34 prophesies that we would actually have the goodness, the law of Yahweh, written into us. That's what he was going to do. Because when we had it on paper, when we had it published, when we had it freely available to us to read, to comprehend, because we all understood the language at one time perfectly clearly, we didn't keep it. When we had it in a book, when we had it written clearly, we all knew OBRY. We didn't read, pay attention, consider, or keep it. So his new covenant was, it's not going to be on a paper in a book for you to keep. I'm writing it into your genetic profile. You're going to be a people who literally have my spirit in you and my word in the form of my law and prophets. It's going to be written into the fiber of who you are. That's why there is a people made up of a number of nations who qualify as this people with this kind of character. That doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. That doesn't mean we can't be misled. That doesn't mean we don't start destructive behaviors, self-destructive behaviors. It doesn't mean that, because we can. That means as a people, he was going to make us very different than what we were and very different than other people, which he did. That's one of the reasons why you don't have to freak out, because the Bible, as we know it, is full of so much error. You don't have to freak out. He wrote it into his people. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want, however we want. That's irresponsible. That's what a lot of people out there who claim to be good, who act like they're good, who have the facade of being good, aren't getting. When actually, if they just looked into their dogmas and doctrines, behaviors, things they've been taught, and they start picking away at it logically, they would find that it crumbles. Even those things. They don't have to believe the things that I believe. They don't have to have done the amount of study and research and looking into the things that I have, though I wish they would. They don't have to. That's all I started doing. Years ago, 6 years ago, was it 6, 7 years ago? It was about the time I was 40, and I'm 46. I started pulling on those threads. 6 years. I started pulling on those threads. And I believed in, I had, basically you could say that my belief system at that time was just like conservative, Calvinistic evangelicalism. That's what I believed at the time. I believed in futurism as far as eschatology goes, left behind, that sort of thing. Okay? But it didn't add up. And who the Jews claimed to be, that didn't add up either. And so I just started pulling on some threads. And it took a heck of a long time to get from there to here, but I got here. There was a lot of suffering from there to here. It may have been self-imposed. It may have been imposed by Yahweh to accomplish his purposes. Either which way, it hasn't been easy. But, if they would just start understanding the kind of deceptive language that is used by these people who claim to be authorities, they're not authorities. They're not authorities. Why do I say that? Because they are lawless. They're lawless. What's our law? What's our law supposed to be? Our law is supposed to be the law that Yahweh gave our ancestors for us to keep. A lot of that is, look, it's not that everything is not understandable. A lot of things are really simple. Like you can look at the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20. And a lot of that language is really, really, really straightforward, okay? Like literally 5 of the commandments are like 2 or 3 words. Starts out with la, which means no, not. And then it gives you the verb or concept. Okay? No murder. No bearing false witness against your neighbor. No sex with another man's wife. No theft. No coveting. They're really straightforward. So some things we can't understand, but that's law. What he gives is law. That's law. What they make up, that's just their rules to keep their hegemony intact. That's all that is. That's all that is. All of everything that they're doing, all of this legislation they pass, all of these documents like this, which is in itself, it's an irony. It is an irony because it's called combating targeted disinformation campaigns. Except they're not going to tell you that what they're doing and this document in itself is a targeted disinformation campaign. This is the, I'm not going to call it insanity. I don't have the same judgments about our enemies that a lot of people who are thinking about it emotionally have. I know what they're doing. They're waging war. They're not waging war that you're fighting on a battlefield somewhere or anything like that. They're just waging a very different kind of war. I understand what they're doing. I'm not detached from it in a sense that I don't feel. I feel very strongly. I know what they've done to the so-called Germans and so-called Irish for a very long time. And I say so-called because that's just what we've been called somewhat recently. Those are my kinsmen. Okay? I'm mostly German, a little bit Irish, maybe a little Anglo and Scandinavian in there. Mostly German and Irish. I know what they've been doing to my people for a very long time. So I'm not detached. I'm very emotional about that. Because it makes me very emotional. But you got to look at what they're doing. You got to be detached enough and objective enough to look at what they're doing and why they're doing it. Don't be so emotional about certain things to where it just clouds your ability to judge. You always want your ability to judge to be as sharp as possible. Okay. So they start by basically saying what agencies were involved in this. They give team member names, but if it's the FBI, for and by Israel, they don't give any last names. So they're all shadowy figures. You know, I can say who I am, where I am, what I'm all about, but these people who are supposed to be what? Public servants. They're supposed to be working for us. They don't have to identify themselves, even in what's supposed to be a government document for government use. Yeah? No kidding. So anyways, like starting at the outline, I'm going to have to read some of this. They go into, disinformation has been running rampant since the inception of social media and the internet and online, all that stuff. And of course, the purpose of this document is to inform lower level agents who are not given the kind of information that the higher level agents are, because everything in the government is compartmentalized. That's how they successfully use our own people to deceive our own people. Compartmentalization. That's why when the ignorant out there who don't understand the world or how the world works tells you something like, what? Was you trying to tell me that everybody everywhere is lying about this? That there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, they're all in on it? No, they're not all in on it in the sense that they have all of the information and they're still willfully working against us. They're compartmentalized. They just do their jobs. It's the few at the top who know what's going on. They're the ones that actually do this. Now, a lot of them, that isn't not holding these people guiltless, whether they're educators or whether they are policy enforcers, also called police, military, alphabet agencies. Policy enforcers. They're enforcing the policy of these people, the rulers, and not law enforcement. That's not law. That's policy. Hey, if you want to be a constitutionalist, that's fine. Okay, it's not really fine, but look, even in that, okay, law was, you're not doing harm, you're not depriving or deceiving others. You haven't broken the law. Okay, this is policy. But now, what they're going to do is they're going to talk about deceiving. Now, here's what's really bizarre. They're going to tell us a lot about disinformation campaigns and how they're waged and everything. But of course, a lot of the people that are involved in this are the very people that are actually actively involved in disinformation campaigns that they are subjecting on us. And they're using their tentacles like a great freakish beast, big octopus. They're using their tentacles in the media, in publishing. They're using their tentacles in social media. They have their youth centers and their IDF centers and so on and so forth, where trolls are just constantly typing away in local. They'll set up local news groups for local counties or states, and they're in there typing away, or they're running them and they're cutting out information, posts that you want to put up. They're all over the place. But they don't pay any attention to them, because the purpose of this is not to actually end disinformation. It's not to actually teach us about disinformation and who is disinforming. It is to twist it in the sense of trying to accuse those who are actually informing of disinformation. Okay? Now, in the scope, starting on page 4, they write, this paper was produced by the Combating Targeted Disinformation Campaigns team, operating under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security Analyst Exchange Program. There's a name. The paper was developed based on open source research and interviews with identified subject matter experts. I wonder who those would be. All judgments and assessments are based solely on unclassified sources and are the product of joint public and U.S. government efforts, do not necessarily represent the judgments and assessments of the team members' employers. Okay. Well, that's a nice sophisticated way of saying that we at the DHS are publishing information, but we're not holding anybody to account for it. How alphabet agency, how American alphabet agency-esque is that? Now, disinformation overview. This is important. Disinformation is not synonymous with false information or fake news. False information that is shared with others without the intent to mislead can be defined as misinformation. People share misinformation because they believe the information is true when, in fact, it is not. So that's why you've got guys like Snopes out there. So he can fact check all of that misinformation all of us dopes are sharing, because, we don't have brains. On the other hand, the purpose of disinformation is to mislead. That's the purpose of disinformation, is to mislead. Disinformation is information created and distributed with the express purpose of causing harm. Disinformation is information created and distributed with the express purpose of causing harm. Disinformation is not necessarily false information. This is important. Don't get these terms confused. Even true information can be presented in misleading ways and thus form the grist of a targeted disinformation campaign. And they're absolutely right about that. You have to use true and authentic information in order to be effective in disinformation or malinformation, which they'll get into too. This happened kind of recently when the Jerusalem Post, I believe it was, that reported on there was this group of sort of militant insurrectionists that had blocked a highway in a suburb of Boston on the 4th of July. Okay, they reported that that happened and that the people near this area were locked down by, local policy enforcement agencies. They reported that was correct. I mean, that's been corroborated that something like that happened. Okay, so that's true information. The disinformation part of it was the story that Jerusalem Post published. They published with a non-related picture of white men in military uniforms and so on and so forth. So they used an actual real story of something that really happened to disinform. Because the first thing people associate with that headline is those white guys that they posed a picture of. When in fact, what it turned out was, and they had to pull that picture really quick and they put another one up, like within a day. They did this, but enough people had seen the headline and seen the picture to associate those two things. You see, so it was effective. And they could say, well, it was just an accident, but it wasn't an accident. It's Jerusalem Post. That's not an accident. It was actually black guys that were out there doing that. It was black guys. So that's the way that you can take truthful information and you can use it to disinform. You can use it as they say, form the grist of a targeted disinformation campaign. Now they go on to write a targeted disinformation campaign in the context of this paper is more insidious than simply telling lies on the internet. One untrue meme or contrived story may be a single thread in a broader operation seeking to influence a target population through methods that violate, you're going to love this part, democratic values, societal norms, and in some jurisdictions, the law. And who decides what any of those things mean? Yeah, you know who decides it. And you know that all of their definitions of these things are so flexible. They're so flexible. They're just flipping the script. This whole document is a great example of a very effective tool in a disinformation campaign being perpetrated by the DHS and their masters, and we know who that is. But they're actually going to tell us, because you have to, just like they just said there. They just said there, they told us, you have to use a certain amount of truth. So when these Masoretes, and we know who the Masoretes were, when they went about applying this Masorah to the text, applying the Assyrian character instead of the OBRY character, which is very similar to the characters that we still use today, from Germanic and Western European languages, filtered down to English. Very similar in look. Very similar in usage and sound, in fact. What they did was they applied this Assyrian character to it, and over time, they altered it. And they did it with the same purposes. And they used, and in fact, that's the whole point. you'll find a lot of passages and a lot of concepts in the Bible that were faithfully translated that we can understand. You have to have a lot of truth in order to make all of your untruth stick effectively. They go on to say a disinformation campaign occurs when a person, group of people, or entity, a threat actor. That's their word they like to use, a threat actor. Well, I know of a whole group of threat actors and what they've been at for a long time. This is what we're talking about. When one of these coordinate, remember the Masoretes, they coordinated. They were working in different areas, in different ways, but they coordinated their campaign over time. And over a number of centuries, they coordinated more and more and more and more in order to get this total biblical disinformation campaign, which is this idea of the Masorah on the pure text, in order to very much solidify it. And they've had to use a lot of threat actors in the perpetration of this in order to make it stick, as well as they have for a long time. Okay? This is when they coordinate to distribute false or misleading information while concealing the true objectives of the campaign, just like they've done with the scriptures. The objectives of disinformation campaigns can be broad, e.g., sowing discord in a population. What, you mean like all of the various different denominations out there? That kind of discord? All of the disagreements that we have, all of the arguments that we have amongst ourselves, the same genetic people who should be working very hard to preserve ourselves and protect one another from a radically violent government. The objectives of disinformation campaigns can be sowing discord in a population, or can be targeted, e.g., propagating a counter-narrative to domestic protests. And many employ all information types: disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, propaganda, and true information. And I'm here to tell you that they have employed every single one of those information types in their distorting of the scriptures from the start to now. Every single one of those. And they use many of them to try to keep us in the dark about what it really says and how it really applies to us, to them, to this creation, to Yahweh, His plans, everything. The target of a disinformation campaign is the person or group the threat actor aims to influence in order to achieve the campaign's objective. They have a target. Who's that target? You know who that target is. It's us. They're prosecuting a war, and have been for a long time, on us. I've said this before. You wonder how it is. How would anybody have the insanity to war on God? You war on God by warring on His people and His purposes through His people. You kill them. You wipe out their seed, which is His seed. Beni Aleim, the sons of God. Targeted disinformation campaigns are not a new phenomenon, you bet they're not. And sophisticated ones follow a predictable progression. They do. They do. That's why we can look at the disinfo campaigns that they're coming out with, COVID, and we can see the marks of their lies and BS and their ultimate bad objectives to kill more of us, to make more of us sick, to imprison more of us, because they follow patterns. They follow patterns because those patterns are tried and true, and they work. They've been using patterns like that since they thought to start distorting the scriptures. After establishing the objective, a threat actor follows distinct steps. Discussed later in more detail. Recon, build, seed, copy, amplify, and control to bring about an outcome. But first, we will explore the history and impacts of these campaigns, the information environment that facilitates modern campaigns, and the motives of disinformation threat actors. Okay, so look, this document's actually really interesting, and it's really informative on how disinformation is actually used. At the same time, it is its own tool of disinformation, because it's very Alex Jonesy in its idea of, well, there's just multiple players on the world scene, and of course America's the good guys, and these people are bad guys when we say, and they're good guys when we say. And they twist a lot of things. However, they show a lot of things too. The whole thing isn't just twisting. But the idea in general of this document is they do tell us in it how these things are done. What they don't tell us is who it is that's doing it, the consistent thread to all of these things, and who's actually behind them, and that it is the same players behind all of them and behind them, the U.S. government. Same people. And they don't actually tell you that the document itself is actually a piece of sophisticated disinformation, because what they're trying to do is just spin. They're using, just like they said, truthful information in order to spin. So, this is what we're seeing being done in the manuscripts that we currently have. They're called Masoretic manuscripts. And yeah, I was going to read more from that document, but really, I don't want to spend too much time in this DHS document. I really think that clip that I read from it gives us all the information we need about how disinformation works and the various aspects and tools of disinformation that's used to disinform. Now, when they said, for instance, the types used, they said disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, propaganda, and true information. So these are things that are used. They may not actually be all the things, but they are things that are used in a disinformation campaign. Now, we probably can take these things and type them into something like the Free Dictionary by Farlex and get a definition for each one of these, just so we're perfectly clear, okay? I'm mostly just going to give you the first definitions that come up. So for disinformation, first one that comes up as a noun, deliberately misleading information. Announced publicly or leaked by a government, or especially by an intelligence agency, in order to influence public opinion or the government in another nation. Imagine that. Definition 2, dissemination of such misleading information. So that's disinformation. It is information usually leaked by government or, powerful individuals or an organization, NGO. And they do mention all the NGOs that participate in disinformation. Again, they're not naming them and they're not showing us how they're connected, which they are. Okay, so we can take another one. Let's just do misinformation, just so we know how these things are all distinct, but how they work together. Okay, misinformation. We've got it as, they don't have as many definitions here in Farlex, but they do have the one, to provide with incorrect information. So misinformation doesn't necessarily have to be, as they said, it doesn't necessarily have to be with bad intent. Now, what they won't give you a definition of in Farlex is malinformation, because, just look at it. Malicious. It's literally information that is disseminated that is specifically malicious, which, honestly, if that's the case, disinformation probably covered it. Okay? Now, we're going to probably get a lot more definitions for propaganda. A noun, the systematic propagation of a doctrine or cause or of information reflecting the views and interests of those advocating such a doctrine or cause. Propaganda can be good or bad, but propaganda just is. This is what propaganda is: propagation of a doctrine or cause or of information reflecting the views and interests of those advocating such a doctrine or cause. So we can see that in the Masoretically understood versions of the Bible, which are the majority versions out there. Propaganda is all of the films, all of the professors teaching these things, all of the Bible colleges teaching these things, all of the books written and published that are supporting, for instance, the idea that Masoretic Hebrew actually is to be trusted. That's propaganda. There's a ton of propaganda out there. There's a lot of propaganda like Palestine as the Holy Land propaganda out there. And we can see that based on who has produced the most quintessential materials on that idea. Propaganda. We have to start looking at a lot of these things as, are they propaganda? Are they disinformation, malinformation? There is misinformation, and that's the problem, is that there are people out there. They're genuine people, like they literally want to try to help. You're not helping if you're not willing to question all of these things, to go to the source. Epistemology. Where are we getting our information and our knowledge from? That's epistemology. If you're not willing to do that, you are part of the problem. So I'm sorry, but there's a lot of you who are genuine, I hope. You're misinforming. And there's a ton of propaganda out there. Most of the arguments people will present to me that really just take the mainstream side of an issue, most of those arguments, they're actually gleaning the information for their argument, what they believe are facts, from propaganda, from materials specifically meant to propagate the original disinformation materials that were produced by the people we call Masoretes, who were producing the Ma'ashira, essentially a text that was quote-unquote Assyrian by these people, this mixture of people who are not Israelites. and who have been kind of blended and mixed all together. So yeah, a certain amount of their genetic seed, it goes back a long way. This is why a certain amount of it is covered in Genesis. But some of those stories, you have to understand, like the story of Jacob and Esau, that's translated terribly. We don't know that Esau sold his birthright for pottage, for a bowl of pottage. It's translated terribly. Freaking terribly. And it is specifically the Masorah, the effects, the influences the Masoretes had on the text itself that has made it possible for those bad translations to even exist. A guy like Christopher John Bjerknes, who has all of these criticisms on the Bible, and he went off at length about Jacob deceiving Esau, when that whole passage is translated terribly. But he can't tell us how it's translated terribly, unless Christopher John Bjerknes knows a heck of a lot about the Masoretic texts and the way that their devices that they've imposed upon the text work to keep us disinformed, misinformed, propagandized, confused, chasing our tails. It's so important to know and understand that that's the condition that the text is in, and the condition that we're in. If we are going to just decide that we know everything that we basically need to know, these doctrines, these dogmas, these ideas, they're solid. Even though the foundations of them are all to be found in the Masoretic text. Don't worry about that. Ignore that. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. These ideas are solid. And we're just going to keep teaching them. It's error. It can't lead to anything good. Error never leads to anything good. This is why. This is why we have to look at all of these things. This isn't me out here trying to deceive anyone. This is me trying to show you what the problems in the text are. And I'm truly sorry that those problems exist, but they're there. We're not going to fix them by ignoring them. We're not going to help our own people by pretending that they're not a reality. And who out there that you trust isn't talking about this? And if you trust anybody out there, I guarantee you, none of them are talking about this. This is what we have to talk about. This is what we have to focus on. Am I going to get everything right? No, nobody's going to. But it's a process. You have to test things. And just like in the process of refining anything, if you're trying to get maybe a precious metal out of something, you burn away anything that's burnable. You heat it to a point to where things separate. You can extract the precious metal. You might have to crush and grind and then extract. There's a lot of methods that you might have to use to extract what is valuable. So I'm not going to get everything right on the first try, but we're going to try it. We're going to look at everything. We're going to try everything. And this is why we're doing it. We're not doing it to be an enigma. I could care less. I couldn't care less about being an enigma. Don't want to be. I just want to know what's true, what's factual, what is reality, and what isn't. So I can base my beliefs, and therefore my actions, on these things that I can know are real. And I want to know what's based on shaky information, what's based on bad information, what's based on outright lies. I want to know those things. I would think you want to know those things. I would think that, I would really hope that those people out there that purport to be teachers would want to know these things, would want to understand these things. I'd hope. But you know, there's a lot of, what did DHS call them? Threat actors out there masquerading as identity, masquerading as Protestants, evangelicals, Catholic priests. Oh yeah. They're in it all, man. And if they won't look and identify these problems, you have to wonder how genuine they are. Are they either some sort of an agent who's purporting to be a true, decent, sincere man or woman? Or are they so close-minded to the truth that they're useless? If they won't entertain ideas with some validity to them, if they say they're off the table just because they're off the table, there is something wrong with that man or woman. Stop. I was going to say stop listening to them. Stop trusting them. And from here on out, when you listen to them, just know that. Keep that in the back of your mind all the time. They won't entertain this. They won't talk about why they don't believe this. They won't talk about why it's not important. If somebody offers a stronger argument about that thing, and I've mentioned off all kinds of things that should never be off the table because they're all important things. They're all matters of truth. And you're damn right. The nature, the shape of the creation, yeah, that is important. Viral theory or exosomes or whatever else it is, whether both of those are bad information, misinformation, malinformation, whatever. Why we get sick. Because the Bible seems to suggest that why we get sick is completely different than what we're talking about, whether it's virus or exosome theory. Okay? The idea of atomic energy and atomic weapons. History. How trustworthy history is. And you know, in all these important fields, when you see specific disinformation people out there, and these are people who, for one thing, they're pushing a certain idea, and they're all going from the same basic script. Take a look at Mudflood, Tartaria, Reset, whatever the hell you want to call this thing anymore. Because they're following the same kind of patterns that the Flat Earth rollout back in 2015 followed. That doesn't make Flat Earth untrue. It doesn't make the fact that we've been lied to about history or how much history or time has transpired. It doesn't make any of those things untrue. In fact, the fact that they're rolling out disinformation campaigns concerning these things should set off the red flags. When somebody out there goes off and says how it's not important whether the earth is flat or a spinning sphere, well, that's ridiculous. They're not paying attention to anything. It is important. That's why they're rolling out so much bad information on it. Our history, the true history of America, the true history of the world, the true history of the Israelite people, the true history of the people at the top that call themselves, bluish. That all matters. That's why there's all disinformation campaigns on these things. I hope more of you are more wary of all of these so-called these characters, these personalities, because I don't know who the hell they are. One of them seems like he's going by his real name. Seems to be genuine. But, I mean, if he is, then you guys, come on. He's obviously, you know who? John Levi. There's another one called Michelle Gibson. You know that Gibson is commonly of the same origin as, say, Levi. And look at a lot of the other ones out there. I don't care if it's Ewar Annan, Philip Druzanen. Don't care. Fendap. If they're all pushing the same basic narrative and their so-called proof is pretty shoddy, and they don't know, they're supposedly just going on bits and pieces of observable information. This is like the same thing with the Masoretic text, or people teaching doctrines based on something as faulty as the Masoretic text. What they have as far as pictures, random documents, random publications, ideas, things that don't add up. If they're trying to tell you that there was a reset because they see a number of phenomena that could have multiple reasons for why those things exist, but so many of them keep hitting the same talking points, you better open your ears and pay attention to the fact that they keep hitting on the same talking points. Well, could it be that they were all hitting on the same talking points because it's all in fact true? That's one possibility. One possibility is they're hitting on the same talking points because they're all going off the same script and they're all told to hit the same talking points. You all need to do your due diligence to look into those things. Because I'm kind of getting tired of seeing people that seem to be sucked in by people who are offering, in many cases, shoddy information, or they're offering good information. Now remember, that's what this DHS document just said, that you have to use true information in order to slip in that poison. You have to use true information, right? So somebody like Michelle Gibson, she's going to offer you a lot of information that's actually helpful, but she's going to be twisting the narrative. Ewar Annan does the same thing. John Levi does the same thing. You got to open your ears, you got to open your eyes, and you got to see where it is they are twisting and tweaking, what they are inserting, just like the Masoretes did on the text, so that they changed fundamental ideas. You have to pay attention to that. Always pay attention to that. Never listen or watch anything with the brain turned off. And it's hard. It's hard, especially at first. And this took a really, really long time for me to get to where everything I read or heard or thought about, I had to put through that filter. You cannot listen to or read anything with that filter turned off. Yeah, it's a lot of work. And that may mean that you have to dedicate more time to it when you can put more of your mental capacity towards it. But that's what you're going to have to do, because everybody has to do their due diligence so that we're not deceived. So that's going to be the point of going forward and discussing what we can understand about this idea of Adameh and other ideas that we're going to find in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. Because, in fact, Genesis was probably, I'm actually convinced, was one of the main books that they had to target and change certain concepts in, so we wouldn't understand them. Because if we understood them, we would be today behaving far differently than we do. And then everything else was pretty much a byproduct of that. So, there it is. And this one's going to be cut off at this point. And I will be back quite soon with episode 10 of the OBRY Hours, where we continue on those concepts, looking at those concepts. And in the meantime, I will be releasing segments of the next book I am reading in the sponsor reading program. It's Ancient America in Notes on American Archaeology by Baldwin. So expect to see those too. So until next time, I truly hope that all of you are very responsible with the information that you ingest, and more especially the information that you disseminate. I'll talk to you all again soon. God willing. Take care.